There is so much incredible food in DC, it can be overwhelming, especially with new spots popping up on what seems like a daily basis. Sometimes I find myself eating at the same places over and over just because I can't decide what new place to try. But this March, there's no better reason to get out there and check some places off the list. It's District Bridges' Tour del Taco. From March 1st to 31st, try as many of DC's best tacos and pupusas as you can to be crowned DC's taconnoisseur. With each taco, you'll earn points to climb the Tour del Taco leaderboard for a chance to win prizes, gift cards, and experiences. You can even give back to the community with the Have a Taco, Give a Taco fundraiser and help cover the cost of a hot meal to a neighbor in need. Visit districtbridges.org/Tour del Taco DC to see the taco map, track your progress, and vote for your favorite taco in the city. Today on CityCast DC, we're talking with the Washington Post's Philip Kennicott about the future of the Kennedy Center. Phil wrote a searing essay last week about the ways Donald Trump's takeover of the center could do massive damage, but maybe not the exact sort of damage a lot of people are predicting. Today is Monday, February 24th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Philip.
Hey, it's good to be here.
You've written really touchingly in the last couple of weeks about the Kennedy Center, and it is this marble institution in Washington. Some people frequent it, other people think of it as sort of akin to a federal museum. But everybody, I think, love it or not, was really quite shocked by the rapid takeover by the Trump administration. What has been the center's cultural significance to DC specifically in the last 5 decades? And how do you see that changing?
It really has been the absolute center for cultural life if you define culture by things like opera and symphonies and chamber music and so on. A fairly capital C culture in the old sense that reflects the center's origins in the Eisenhower and Kennedy and Johnson administrations. It's a kind of mid-century idea of culture, but it's formed a community, several communities, probably more than we even are aware of, around those individual art forms. If you go regularly, you know the people, you know the ushers, you see friends. It is an institution that has brought people together around the arts for so long that I think most of us thought that it could really never be vulnerable to this kind of attack from the government.
Right, so Trump has described it as like this sort of palace of wokedom. I think of it as a place that my mom and her friends go to watch classical music.
I mean, it's funny to think of that. Yeah.
How do you see it changing?
That's the big unknown. What we have at this point is a new chairman of the board, which is Donald Trump himself. We have a new interim director of the center, and that's the position that's most likely to have an impact on the offerings that are presented. We know that there have been some cancellations. It's a difficult thing to program a performing arts center the size of the Kennedy Center. There's an opera hall, a concert hall, a smaller opera house. There's the Terrace Theater. There are the Millennium Stages, a lot of moving parts. And that kind of work happens months and years in advance. So we're all wondering, are they simply going to scuttle entire season and let it go dark for a while and then come back with some entirely new vision of what they want to present? I think most people are thinking that's unlikely because it would be so damaging. But what's happened in the last week or two is that we've gotten really bad at predicting what's going to happen. And worst case scenarios tend to be the ones that you need to consider most forthrightly.
So what does it mean for Trump to be the chairman? The previous chairman was David Rubenstein, a billionaire, a super philanthropist. Being chairman, what does that give Trump the power over, and what did his predecessors consider as their obligations?
So previously, the chairman had very little influence, unless they wanted to exert it, and they didn't, over the programming. Mainly, their job was to sit at the top of a pyramid of fundraisers and give a lot of money, and by example and coercion and persuasion, convince other people to give a lot of money. And David Rubenstein held that position for a long time, and he gave an enormous amount of his personal wealth to Kennedy Center. It's over $100 million. It's a lot of money.
Trump, correct me if I'm wrong, historically has not been a big benefactor of operas and fine arts.
That's right. We can even pull out a little bit more and say that he's not had a stellar record running nonprofits or anything that's remotely connected to things like the humanities or universities. His own foundation was shut down by the state of New York, and he had to pay money back to the state. It seems unlikely that he's going to be personally filling in for what David Rubenstein gave out of his own pocket. Whether or not he can convince people from a kind of new coalescing wealthy elite around Mar-a-Lago to give money, I think that's unlikely too, but I don't know, maybe it'll happen.
How has the board changed? I mean, he ousted a lot of, or maybe all of the Democratic appointees to that board.
Right. So to become the chairman, he had to be elected by the board. And to do that, he had to get rid of everybody who wasn't personally loyal to him. So he got rid of, I think, all of the Biden appointees. Traditionally, this has been a very bipartisan board. Partisan's even kind of the wrong word. People are sort of expected to come from, all across the spectrum, but really be there for one reason, which is devotion to the well-being of the Kennedy Center. He appointed his members of his inner circle to replace those people. We don't know what they want. We don't know how they're going to act. We don't know how much money they're going to give. It's all unknown at this point.
So as you say, these board members, they have historically seen their job mostly as like stewards of the institution, particularly on its money side. They're not the artistic director. But since this change, a number of performances have been canceled, some because the artists pulled out because they don't like what they're seeing, and another, as you mentioned, because they canceled it. Can you tell us what has been canceled and what your read of it is?
So a number of prominent people have left. For instance, Renee Fleming, she was an artistic advisor. She went out the door, and a couple of others, somebody who was helping with kind of programming and imagining things for the National Symphony. And then there have been cancellations. A prominent actress, comedian Issa Rae has left. There was a musical that had been created at the Kennedy Center and done very well called Finn, that in indirect ways alluded to kind of the issues, the emotional well-being of being LGBT. That was implied. It wasn't really directly stated. There was a plan for a national tour of that, and that has been scuttled. The sense the Kennedy Center is giving of that is it was financial, but it's not clear why. If it had been successful, it couldn't have been successful in a national run. So along with the people who have left and the cancellations, there's also a new climate when people look at changes in anything on the schedule at the Kennedy Center. So there is concern about a performance that the Gay Men's Chorus of Washington had scheduled during Pride. The Kennedy Center has issued a statement saying that the change to that was made before this all began. But the climate has changed, and people are trust in the center is now somewhat less than it used to be, simply because nobody really knows who's making the decisions. And so the chorus feels that this change may reflect in the new management, even if the center is saying that it was a decision made beforehand. So
Steve Bannon suggested staging a performance by the J6 Prison Choir. Do you think this kind of stuff will actually be pushed for? I mean, the kind of populist fare?
I mean, Bannon is the sort of rhetorical loose cannon that is always out there making noise for Trump and sometimes problems for Trump as well. I think the key thing about this statement that Steve Bannon made is it shows where a significant portion of the Trump coalition is when it comes to the idea of the arts and elites and being a member of the urban classes. He explicitly said that this is something like the high church of the atheistic administrative state. And then in a weird aside, he said, and I actually like opera. So it's not clear to me how seriously we're supposed to take that. What it does is it gives encouragement to people who really have no connection at all of the Kennedy Center to believe in a caricature of what it does. And that character is really deeply embedded in American society. You know, the opera is seen as elite. If you go to the opera on any given night, it's not going to be jewels and tiaras and people who look like they just got, caught in the flash of a Ouija picture. It's actually a really broad, range of people. And a lot of them can barely afford those tickets, but they go because they're passionate about the art form. So again, it remains to be seen what happens if they're going to get deep into programming decisions. It sounds like an enormous amount of work, and it would take an enormous amount of expertise that so far doesn't seem to be there in the person who's serving as the interim director.
CityCast is made possible by the Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University, celebrating 1 year of performances at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg Center, located at 555 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. This spring, immerse yourself in the vibrant offerings at DC's newest venue for music and dance, featuring a full season of free performances. Experience a dynamic range of events, including orchestral, jazz, and chamber music, all presented by esteemed Peabody faculty, students, alumni, and special guests. Highlights of the season include the Super Collider Symposium from March 13th to March 15th, a symposium on algorithmic composition tools bringing together more than 50 leading researchers for presentations of art and science-based creative work, and Load Bang on April 30th, a New York City-based new music chamber ensemble performing works by Peabody composition faculty, including Guggenheim Fellows and Pulitzer Prize finalists. While all events are free, tickets are required for entry. Explore the full performance schedule, find out more details, and reserve your tickets at washingtondc.jhu.edu.
Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other toppings, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
So I got the sense the money is the most important thing here, that this board is supposed to bring in a great deal of money, and it's hard to imagine the reconstituted board doing the same thing. The other place where the Kennedy Center's money comes from is ticket sales, which come from these, gray-headed, not glamorous opera fans who you were just describing, not from a bunch of swells. So if that goes away, what does that do to the center? I mean, is it the kind of thing that could be just easily reversed in 4 years as another election and a different board comes in?
I think the center, like most arts organizations, is a lot more fragile than that. They have an endowment, but as the recently fired head of the Kennedy Center has said in a recent interview, that endowment is small compared to the size and the scope of the Kennedy Center. So they don't have a lot to fall back on, and you don't want to spend endowment unless you absolutely have to in any case. When the new interim director, Rick Grinnell, came in, he sent out a tweet or a truth or something, but it was a kind of a drive-by hit on the Kennedy Center suggesting that it had been financially mismanaged, that it had no cash on hand. And most of us who read it were like, have you ever looked at the bottom line of a nonprofit arts group? I mean, all of these groups are having to raise money to make up the difference between ticket sales and costs. The finances of the Kennedy Center, the federal government actually covers a relatively small part of the center's actual budget. It covers the part to basically keep the door open and the heat on and maintain the facilities. The rest of it is all raised either from ticket sales or from donations. And those are two different constituencies that are both making noises about who is the Kennedy Center and do we still share its values. So
Right.
There are some warning signs out there that they may get hit from both sides, from the rich people who donate and the not so rich people who may send $500, and from the people who are buying tickets on a regular basis.
Because so you could see if this thing acquires a sort of permanent partisan charge, where it is seen as a Trump organization, a lot of people who are not pro-Trump will bail out of giving and won't necessarily be made up for by a rush of new people, and will also bail out of buying tickets or buying subscriptions. And then the third piece, I guess, is the artists that, a number of artists, as you say, have pulled out. And I could imagine it being the sort of venue that certain types of people don't want to play.
All of that is happening at once. One of the people that I interviewed for my story said he couldn't think of another institution of this size that had been plunged as quickly and totally into disarray as the Kennedy Center was in the last week and a half. I'm hearing from people who perform at the Kennedy Center that they're having to reach out to their subscribers, to their donors, and ask, is it okay for us to stay there? What should our red lines be? And they're thinking through scenarios.
Can you give me a hypothetical?
Well, there are a number of them. What happens if you've scheduled a concert and the guest soloist decides that they just think it's too toxic to perform at the Kennedy Center? When do you cancel? Do you replace? What happens if everything's going okay and Donald Trump does something that is so completely shocking? For instance, the comments he made about the white nationalists in Charlottesville in his previous term, and suddenly people were saying, "Oh wait, we have to get some distance from this guy. We cannot be, doing anything that's associated with him." What happens if that overtakes you? Do you have a plan? Do you move your concert to another venue? Do you move to another venue now? Because it's not easy to make sudden changes at the last minute if you've been planning for years in advance.
Right. You, in your writing, you compared Trump's potential influence over the Kennedy Center to the tactics of Viktor Orban, other authoritarian leaders. What did Orban do, and what are the parallels here?
Well, so first let me Let me point out one salient difference. The United States, for better or worse, has had a very decentralized arts economy. In places like Hungary, really is a relic of communism and even older historical models. There's been a lot of state funding to arts groups, so the state has a lot of leverage over them. Where Orban's behavior becomes concerning, I think, for parallels with what's happening right now, is specifically the kinds of people he's targeting to develop the emotional nexus for going after the Kennedy Center. Trans people, LGBT people, and then talking about nationalism. And Orban has very successfully fused homophobia and xenophobia and nationalism into a pretty toxic but efficient way of manipulating the emotions of too many of the Hungarian people. And what is the current interim leadership doing at the Kennedy Center? Well, they're going after trans people. They're going after drag shows, which are a absolutely minuscule part of what the Kennedy Center offers. But interestingly enough, cross-dressing and gender fluidity is absolutely woven into many of the arts historically for centuries that the center presents. So Orban's model isn't so much a structural model for how you take over the arts as it is a messaging model for how you develop the sympathies that will let people sort of let these things just slide. One of the things that I heard from two separate people when I was interviewing is that the current administration actually looks to the Emirates as a model for how you would run a cultural center, because Abu Dhabi has created this massive cultural island with these big museums, and it's very sort of, blue chip and trophy and high level, and they brand it with the best things, but it is completely under the control of the royal family.
By the way, have you heard anything about other venues, like saying, like, come here, everyone's welcome? There are a lot of venues here. They're not all the same.
Yeah. So the challenge is finding venues that are not in any way under the federal umbrella. So there's some great theaters out there. The National Gallery has an auditorium. The Museum of Natural History has a magnificent auditorium that's really underutilized. But those are Smithsonian or National Gallery, and so the same concerns are going to be there. Then you get down to some of the other venues, and there's acoustic problems with some of them. Some of them are hard to reach. They're not easy to get to by car, or there's not good metro access. So, the Kennedy Center has got, for better or worse, it's developed a set of habits that we all know well, and it's not easy just to step into a new venue.
So let's talk about after. We still don't have permanent presidencies. In the event this carries on and a president more interested in status quo anti-normal comes in, how easy will it be to put Humpty Dumpty together again?
It depends on how much debt they incur, how much of the endowment gets eaten up, how deeply they cut into the offerings. The pandemic was really hard on audiences, and it took a long time for them to come back. And in the arts, a season is an eternity, because that's your budget. That's the money you've got. If they succeed in sort of driving away a significant portion of either the artists, it will take years to rebuild that. I think the best case scenario that everybody's hoping for is that Trump loses interest and it kind of drifts, and there'll be a few, symbolic acts like, saying that the gay men's choir can't perform at the National Symphony, and then he'll forget about it and things will carry on. I hope for that as a best case scenario too. I'd also point out, however, that this administration has been much more efficient at doing what it wants to do. And a lot of what it can do is by essentially federalizing the same thing. So it's offered a model to, say, state art agencies or governors that have a lot of control over state arts agencies, large performing arts centers in the Midwest and the Northwest and in the South, art museums. What they're doing is offering up a model for how you can chill the conversation about things like diversity, equity, and inclusion at the state level. And they don't necessarily have to do it all with federal tools.
So I want to ask an optimistic question, which is, do you think there's any chance the reverse happens here, that folks read what you're saying, hear some of these predictions, get afraid, and start to flood in to keep the center from collapsing?
I was there last night, and a magnificent Korean pianist played the complete piano works of Ravel, and it was a good full audience. It was a long concert, about 3 hours, and at intermissions, people were pessimistic, deeply concerned, but you absolutely have the sense that they were there not just because they wanted to hear this magnificent performance, but because they needed to be there. They needed to sort of assert their loyalty to the institution. Communities, when threatened, do rally together. The problem that I think people are facing, and it's not just when it comes to the arts of the Kennedy Center, is that there are really no efficient levers of power available to people at the federal level to undo or reverse this, simply because of the way the last election played out and because of the decisions that have been made by some of the people in the other branches of government not to exercise the old checks and balances power that they had. So people are feeling, I think, determined, angry, and impotent all at the same time. And that's a really bewildering stew of emotions. And unfortunately, I think that often it can be hardest on the people who are most sympathetic to that view because they're the ones who will listen. So it's easy to protest the Kennedy Center. It's easy to go and hold a sign there or say, I'm never going to go to the Kennedy Center again. The damage that will be done to the Kennedy Center will not undo in any way the driving animus that has led to these decisions.
Thank you so much for being here.
I'm always glad to chat. I wish we could have a conversation on a happier subject.
Next time. And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.